If you can, try to get something which is gift card size, maybe A5 or even A6, which is what I believe I'm going to be painting on, and just 2 flathead brushes. Okay, so this is going to be the 2-brush technique, and I'm going to be showing you how I made this card, which was a gift card for an auntie of mine. And basically, it's not going to be photorealistic. This is going to be an approach to making a very impressionistic card and image. By impressionistic, I mean that you're going to have some very loose marks and very expressive marks, and you're going to make the most of the difference between the application of dry paint and wet paint. I'm going to be using blue, yellow, red, the basic colours, and they are a very basic mix. It's cobalt blue, cadmium red, and processed yellow with a titanium white. You use a large flathead brush and a medium flathead brush. Now, usually I use 4 brushes or so, but for this it will only be 2 brushes. So here is how I do it. I start off with the large brush, and I'm trying to get in a nice deep green undercoat. So this is your big expressive marks which start off to show the shape and where you want the flowers to cover, this bouquet to be filling the actual face of the card. So I get this sort of shape in there, and this is basically going to be what you see underneath all of the other different colours that I apply on top. And then I start to get mixes together, again with the big brush, but sometimes with a bit more water so that they're a bit thinner. They're not quite as deep and heavy as that first green, because you want things to sit in layers. So I get a purple mix that's slightly more watery, not too much that it'd take too long to dry, but enough where it has this slight watery washy effect to it. This is not something which I would leave on its own, and I immediately start to get a very deep red to pepper around this bouquet as well. And the reason for that, again, is that you want these deep dark colours and then applying this lighter contrast colour on top, because you want everything to sit in layers. And acrylic is very good to paint in layers, but just be very careful with the opacity of the paint. You'll be able to see that on the side of the paint tub or tube that you purchase. It will have a little box, and it will either be fully filled in, which will mean that it is completely opaque. It will be half filled in, which means it is half opacity, or it will be a completely empty box, which means that it's a transparent paint. And this just means that when you add this type of paint on top, you will need to layer it and layer it up, because you'll be able to see through to the layers below. Sometimes you want to, sometimes you don't, so just be aware of that. I use trial and error, so don't worry if you're not so familiar with how that works. It's just something which you can learn on the way. But for this, I am now doing watery mixes on top of these big heavy blobs that I've made. The watery mixes need a moment to dry, so that's what I'm doing here. I'm letting it sit for a moment, and then before I let it get too dry, I use the brush to mix in certain parts that I notice. I try to keep a keen eye on things that I think look slightly unnatural. Now obviously this is impressionistic, so it's not especially natural, but you don't want anything to look too uniform. You want it to be a naturalistic spread of chaotic, beautiful tonal application of paint, because you're doing a bouquet. And it's not going to be blue, 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 red, 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 green, 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 purple, purple, purple. It just doesn't work like that. It's a mixture of everything, and your senses are overloaded with how colourful and delicate a balance it is. And that's what I'm trying to achieve here. Now this layer here is a very light mix of red, yellow, and a lot of white. This is to try and get a peachy sort of colour. And that sits on top of very, very heavy, big blobs. That's the last thing that is going to dry on this card. And it's not because it's especially watery, but because it's a lot of paint. And that does take a long time to dry. Whereas the other layers will dry in between it, and it won't lift up or affect those other layers. I like this approach because a lot of it sits quite flat, but if you have some very big globs of paint on top that you can just leave and push around and manipulate with the brush, then you can try to capitalize on the shape design you can use with your brush on those big blobs of paint, and that will have quite a nice effect as well. Now what I need to do is get some little effects of some delicate bits and bobs. Now I'm onto the smaller brush. As you can see, I've been using the smaller brush for this second half of the painting. So the first half was for the big marks that you see underneath, and this second part has been with the smaller brush that you can just use the very edge of, just to get some tiny little hints of lighter little spritzes here and there. So if you want to suggest something, and here is something which I'm doing now, which is going to be the vase, which is only a very small glass vase underneath. So I'm not drawing the outline for it, I'm doing the base and I'm doing the water's edge. So if you can see there, I'm just trying to add the tone to suggest where the reflections are coming from, and you're not doing the whole outline so it doesn't look too cartoonish, and you're trying to use a mid-tone because it's not going to be so contrasty at first, and if it is, then you can do that in layers. So what I'm trying to do is do very gentle approaches to suggesting a glass, and then also using the white to bring in highlights and to cut back into those mid-tone strokes of paints that I've added there. Some little bit of touches of lighter greens here and there as well into the bouquet, because it will still always add to that balance that you have. But if you can do this with these two brushes, then you'll have a very nice and expressive piece, I believe. An impressionistic gift card. My auntie loved it. It took about an hour or so, maybe an hour and a half, and I think it's well worth a try. So try it for yourself and see how far you get. Alright, that's the video done. I hope you enjoyed it. I will be doing more art challenges in the future. Full disclosure, this painting was from last year. I believe it was around August or maybe even September when I filmed it. It was filmed on my phone, so it wasn't the 4K quality which I'm trying to offer now for every video. So apologies for that. It might not be the highest quality video, but I still hope that you enjoyed the content and appreciated the fact that it was an art challenge, so it was something which you can try out yourself. And I think it's a lot of fun and a great learning experience. There'll be more of these in the future, some drawing, some painting, maybe even some sculpting. So keep tabs on the channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so, and leave a like and a comment and all that stuff. Thanks.